Welcome back, everyone. It's been about 30 minutes since we left our vegetable stock on the stove. So we're going to check it out here in just a minute. Then we're going to make our split pea soup and then get the cheesesteaks going. And we're probably about an hour out from plating. So we'll make this about 20 minutes and then we'll come back to you for the finished product. But we'll start things off with our vegetable stock here. So we have the stock. I'll bring it over. So that's been going maybe 35 minutes or so. We're going to transfer it to another pot using a fine mesh strainer so that we can keep all of the liquid and not have any of the solids that we don't want. So have the strainer right here in another pan. Remember, for this stock we had used onions, carrots, celery, a little bit of the top of a red bell pepper, garlic. I did add probably about 4 bay leaves in after we left. We had some mushrooms, mushroom stems in there, some salt and some peppercorns. So I'm trying to get everything I can out of here. And we have a lot of what's left sitting down there. Man, it smells so good though. So I'm gonna drain off the rest. And then I'll bring the camera to you, and it's going to look a lot like a chicken stock would. I mean, it's really, you can see texturally. Let me see if I can show you this. So it has some of the oils that you might have in a regular stock. It has a color that you would normally see from that a vegetable a chicken or beef stock, and it looks really good right now. And that's only half an hour. And there's people who believe, oh, you need to let a stock go all day or multiple days. But the great thing with vegetables is they impart a lot of flavor in a short amount of time. So now I'm going to dump the vegetables that I had into the trash because I'm not going to reuse them. And then I'm going to take my stock and keep it aside, and I'm going to use the same pot to make our split pea soup. So I'm going to grab this real quick. So I'll give it a quick rinse. I'll be right back. So the base of basically any soup you want to make, and soups really aren't very difficult. They're just sometimes time consuming based on what you're trying to cook. But soups can be basically any combination of what you have left over, and that's the magic of them. Is as long as you know your balance and know the amount of salt and a little bit of fat and some texture, you can make some incredible stuff. So right now I'm just going to try and make maybe about 5 or 6 servings of the split pea soup. I'm going to start things off by heating up my stock pot. Onion. Carrots. I've peeled these already because now we're going for the finished product. So unlike the stock where I didn't peel the carrots and I actually put the skin of the onion here, I'm going to remove the skin, and I do have peeled carrots. So if you watched yesterday, you saw the technique of dicing. Here I'm going to do more of a coarse chop, but I still want to show you the difference. If you leave this crown of the onion on, it's a little bit easier to peel and see where the difference is. The one thing you have to make sure you're cautious of is that you don't take too many layers off, because you may be fooled thinking, oh, I need to take this layer off here because I see this little extra. Well, if you dig down deep, you see now you don't need to, and I can actually go down here. So if you need the help peeling, go there. Otherwise, what I do is always cut the crown off, so I can see exactly where I want to go. So I know that I take this one layer off, and I'll take the second layer off, and that's it. Two layers are off. I leave the tail on. I'm going to do a coarse chop. The tail just kind of helps it all stay together so it doesn't flail everywhere, and then you end up cutting yourself with a knife. It really sucks when that happens. So for this one, I'm just going to use 1 onion, 2 carrots. I'll use 2 stalks of celery here. And I really don't care so much right now about how finely I chop this, because for this application, for a split pea soup, I'm going to end up pureeing the whole thing anyway. So it really doesn't matter too much. All I'm trying to do is impart some flavor and know that they won't just be strained off, they'll actually become part of the dish. All right, so I have my onions here. Just a smidge more oil, enough to get the onions starting to go. So for this, I'm going to try and avoid having any of the skin in there. Onions are cranked, and you can actually see the steam coming off. I'm going to turn it down to about medium at this point so that I don't over-brown the onion. A few garlic cloves as well. Like 4 of them. Remember when cutting, I showed you yesterday, try and keep your fingers tucked so you don't end up cutting them off. Use your knuckles to guide the side of your knife. Onions are in there. Now the carrots are going to go in. Show you this in a second. Now it's the garlic. I'm going to do kind of a coarse chop. Once again, with it being pureed, it doesn't matter so much. Obviously, I want to try and impart the flavor as much as possible, but I'm not too worried about the presentation at the end since it's all getting blended. So when I say coarsely chopped, I mean I've really just coarsely chopped it. And the last thing will be celery. So for this, I'm actually going to use a few stalks and some of the leaves as well, because it just adds a little bit more to it. We're looking for that green component. These leaves are totally edible. I know a lot of people throw them out, but they're kind of that deliciously bitter. Yeah. My wife just made a noise. Ignore that. Those of you that drink IPA understand deliciously bitter. So celery will go right in here. So that's kind of the start. I mean, the onions are already translucent just in the time I've been doing this. This is that traditional French mirepoix, celery, carrots, onions. It is the base of so much cooking, and it imparts so much flavor. And the nice part about it is not one of them stands out. So they're all just that supporting role. So at this point I have our stock, and then I have a whole ton of split peas. The nice part with this recipe is you don't have to use split peas. You can do black beans, you can do lentils. Any dried bean you might have sitting in there will work for this type of soup. So right now I'm going to go about 3 to 1 liquid to dried pea. So I have 2 cups of peas that I'm going to use for this. Remember, I used 1 onion, 2 carrots, 2 stalks of celery. So there's my 2 cups of peas. They're just going to go right on top of this. I'll show you what this looks like now. So celery, carrots, onions, and peas. I'll sit in there for just a second, and then I'm going to bring in 6 cups. Since I did 2 cups of peas, I want 3 to 1 ratio. 6 cups of this vegetable stock that we just made. This is one I usually just kind of eyeball, but just so that we're all working together at the same pace. Just so you can see this color, it is incredible. Just half an hour of cooking, and this is the color that I got on this vegetable stock. So I'm still working on moving the opposite way. It's pretty incredible. So now it's there. I have the heat on. I'm going to add in a few herbs right now. For soups, I love dried herbs because they actually bloom in the soup. It also, they're pretty concentrated. You don't have to use quite as much. So for this one, I'm going to use a little bit of cumin. If you're going for exact measurements, I'd call it maybe 1/4 teaspoon, not a whole ton. Some marjoram. For this, let's call it maybe a full teaspoon of it to 1.5 teaspoons. I'm also going to use some basil. And kind of the same thing, about 1 teaspoon to 1.5 teaspoons. Marjoram and basil are kind of the sisters in this thing. It's all there to be a supporting role. So now everything that I like is in here. The last thing I'm going to add to finish it off is salt and pepper. Now remember, the stock I made intentionally undersalted because I want to be able to control that level. So I'm going to add in to taste, really, but I know that I'm going to add at least maybe 2 tablespoons to start based on the amount of liquid I have. And then this pepper, I'm going to kind of do the same thing. I'm just going to maybe do it to taste, and I'll probably add in almost a full tablespoon because I want that pepper to stand out. If you don't like the pepper as much, you can just add a little bit. I would definitely suggest adding a little bit because it's going to help develop another layer of flavor. So we're back here. We have our soup. It's starting. I'm now going to bring the temperature up to high. I'm going to let it start to boil. And then after it starts to boil here, I will cover it because I want to control the liquid. Uncovered allows that liquid to evaporate, making a more concentrated flavor. I now have the concentration that I want, and I'm trying to keep it contained within the pot. So at this point, I want to cover it and let it sit. But I'm going to wait for it to start boiling first. While that's doing that, I'm going to start on the cheesesteak part of the dish tonight. So if you were listening earlier, I'm using some London broil because the store didn't have a whole ton of stuff. And once I saw the London, I know it's a round part of the cow that doesn't have a lot of fat. It's going to cook very quickly. It's not going to have a ton of flavor. So I know that it's kind of that blank canvas, and I can add in all sorts of different things. And if I slice it thin enough, it'll work kind of like tenderizing if I kept it as a whole. Because those of you that have had London broil back in the 70s or whatever when it was popular, pretty darn boring, if you ask me. But so this is going. I'm going to pull the meat out. So I've had it in the freezer for a little bit more than half an hour. Look at this too. This is impressive. I was mentioning this yesterday. The store kept the sale price on even with everything going on here. So I found this. What was that, yesterday? But I'm pretty impressed that they didn't go and jack the prices up. But there wasn't a whole lot to choose from, so I'm going to see if I can move this camera so you can see how I do this meat. Let's see if I can figure this out here. All right, hopefully I can do this without the camera falling. All right, awesome. All right, so we got our London broil right here. So this was my knife that I used for vegetables. I really only try to use it for things that aren't going to require a whole ton of pressure. I do have a knife that I like for proteins. So this is my protein knife, and let me see if you can actually see, I don't know, with this lighting. So this is, it's from New West Knife Works. It is kind of my favorite protein knife. It just it's a little bit thicker. It's forged steel, and it has just an incredibly fine blade at the tip to really get into protein. So the one thing I'm going to do here, they didn't do a fantastic job butchering, so I'm just going to finish the butchering for them. Like this piece right here is really not going to be edible, so I'm going to slice this right off. So when working with protein, especially something that you have to put a little more pressure into, make sure you're really protecting your fingers here. When you're slicing, I'm going to work on this part first. I'm slicing away from my body and away from my fingers, because anytime something slips, the amount of pressure you have to put into protein, that just wouldn't be a fun trip to the hospital. So I'm going away from my body here. That's going to be unusable. And notice I have my meat cutting board on top of my vegetable cutting board. I've frozen it so I know there's not going to be any juices dripping or anything like that. So now I have to get all this stuff off. I'm going to look on the back side. I see that it doesn't go all the way through. I do see this piece here, so I'm going to get this off right now. I also have a little different grip on my protein knife than I do on my chef's knife. My chef's knife I hold like this. This one I use my index finger as kind of that guide. Just a little bit different. So now I know that because it doesn't go all the way through, I'm going to go at an angle away from me like this. And that way I'm not wasting too much. So there it is. That is my butchering right there. And now it's time to slice into what I'd call an acceptable bite for a filly. So what I'll probably do is go once down the middle, and then I'll slice finely into pieces. The other way to do it is to keep it whole, slice finely, and then cut afterwards. You know what I'll do? I'll show you both ways. So here will be the once down the middle. And then this one I'll do finally and then cut afterwards, and I'll show you why I do it, but teach their own on this. Let's make sure you can see what I'm doing here. So I want to cut away from me. It's a lot easier to cut this when it's partially frozen. So now I have these really thin pieces of steak that are going to cook down. And this square is kind of that shape I'm looking for. So this is the time-consuming thing going through. So rather than tucking my fingers here where I'm going to dig into the meat, this is the one time I have to be really careful, but I actually do put a little bit of pressure down with my hands and just make sure I'm placing that knife safely. If you're lucky enough to have a deli slicer at home, that would also work really well for this preparation. You want to make sure you don't have any piece that's too thick. Like I had one base right here. I'm just slicing it up a little bit more so it's not too thick. So remember, when you're cutting like this, everything away from your body, away from your hands. You never want to slice into yourself. Just a super dangerous way of going about things. All right, and I am going to take 1 second and show you that our soup is up there and it is boiling. So I will be right back while I cover the soup. So the soup is now simmering, and I'm continuing on with the meat. So if I get to this spot here, so if you look here, this is that kind of that perfect, it'll be nice squares. Where this starts to become a little bit rectangular, it's no problem to cut off what you think you won't use or cut off a smaller chunk so that you don't have to go through and each time slice again. So that's what I'm going to do right here. So now I'm working with 3 instead of 2. Once we get to the end, it becomes a little bit more dangerous, so rather than throwing 3 of them together, I'm going to just do 1 at a time. Cut some super paper thin slices. All right, so I have some of these ends that I'm not going to risk cutting my finger off. I may just cook them separately. Now here's that other method of doing it. So I have all of this. Let me grab a plate and move it to it. Here's the other method, and kind of show you why I don't love it as much. So I get through it. It sticks to the knife a little bit more. And then I have to go back and cut it a second time. So I'll come in here and I'll say, okay, well, here's this bit and this bit and this bit, and that's too big, so I need to do this, and I'll do that. So it's an extra step that I don't love. All right, so there's the meat that we're gonna use right now. I'll set this off to the side. Wash my hands real quick. All right, now we will move on to the onion that we're going to use here for the sandwich. Go back to my vegetable knife. I'm gonna cut off the tip. Start to peel it. Get rid of any of this extra peel that's in the way. Go down the middle of the onion and I'm going to peel. I'm looking here, I see this. This is a little bit yellow. I'm gonna peel that as well. You can see, even though it's not, I don't know if you can tell the difference here. But I would call this a little too fibrous and inedible, where this will be great. Same thing here, I'm looking 1, 2 layers, pretty consistent. I'll get this out of my way. Now for a cheesesteak, I don't want to dice the onion. I don't want to do anything. I want the onion to have some length to it and have some bite to it. So for this one, I'm actually going to use some of the same method that I did for dicing, where I am going to go down this part of the onion. Let's see if I can turn it in a way that you can see. So I'm going to go down the onion here. Some people do it this way. I feel that I have more control over how wide it is here. So I'm going to go right down to the tail, lift up. I'm going to do it a second time. I'm going to turn it around. I'm going to do it a third time. And that's it. And then I'm going to go down the onion this way. The only thing I'm not going to do that we do with dicing is finish it off here. I'm just going to cut off here. And now all of a sudden we have these beautiful pieces of onion that'll be great in the sandwich. Alternate method of doing it, if you don't love that, is to, here's the tail, just go down at an angle. Just make sure you're kind of following the angle of the onion with your knife. Cut off the tail and kind of that same thing. So that's going to be the first thing that goes into my pan. So I'm going to bring this camera back over to the other side and we will continue cooking. And Rob, my friend from Philly, said we don't say sandwiches, just cheesesteaks. Well, once you see the bread, Rob, that we're using, you're going to understand why I'm saying sandwiches. It is definitely not a Philly cheesesteak that we're making tonight because we don't have the rolls that you'd have in Philly. It's extra burger buns that I had. Larry just said, let me know when you're doing something plant-based. That's actually what I'm doing right here. This split pea soup is completely vegan, and it should be delicious. If you watch the first show that I did about an hour ago, that's the start of the vegetable stock, and then you saw all the other ingredients that I put into this split pea soup. So the soup is in here. We're working on this cheesesteak now, so I'm going to move the remainder of my vegetable stock. This is my cast iron pan. I love this thing. I use it for so many different things. So this is going to be what I cook the meat, the onions, the mushrooms, and the peppers in. Yes, all of them. If you do have someone that is vegan or vegetarian, you can do the onions, mushrooms, and peppers, pull it out, and then cook the meat. No problem, but I would highly recommend at least cooking those three in the same pan, even if they're not together, just so that they're close to each other, because some of that aroma will transfer one to the other and will make it just a much more flavorful component of your dish. So a little oil will go in there. I'm going to move this soup to the back burner so you can see what's going on. Let's go to the... Always test to see how hot it is. It's going to go there. And I think that's probably a good angle here for us. All right, so we have our oil heating in this cast iron in a second, as soon as I get the heat on. Onions will be the first thing to go in. After that, remember we use the top of the pepper in that vegetable stock. We use the mushroom stems in the vegetable stock. So now we're gonna use the mushroom caps and the peppers. And those will sit and cook at a low heat for a long time. We're looking at least 20 minutes. So what I don't want to do is put the onions into a cold pan, because I don't want that oil to seep into the onion. I want to really kind of get a little bit of a sear on it. And then I'll turn it down from there, because I don't want to have an oily onion. I think I'm pretty happy with where it is there. So I'm just going to make sure that the rest of these onions are separated, and then they'll go right into the pan. Here we go. Wooden spoon here, so I'll get the onions all apart. They're going to start to cook right here. They'll all be separated. They'll start to shrink down just a little bit. While that's happening, I'm going to take the red bell pepper and bring this up just a smidge. All right, so I'm going to take the red bell pepper. Make sure the seeds are out. I've already taken the top off. I'm going to slice it down the middle one time. So then there's this rib. So that doesn't cook very well. So that's something I'm actually just going to peel out by hand. Peel out all of the rib here. And then I'll start on the pepper. So I'm going to quarter it one more time. Here's the other thing that happens. So now I have the end of the pepper, which is round. I have this side, which is flat. I want to be able to julienne this, to be able to make basically matchsticks, right? So you can do one of two ways. You can either rip it with your hand to flatten it, or you can use your knife and make two scores. So I made two scores, and then it just kind of pulls apart, and you can flatten it from there. But having a flat pepper is really going to help make even matchsticks. So I've taken a quarter of the pepper. Here's what it looks like. And that'll cook down with these onions as soon as we... This one. I'm happy with how brown they are now, so I'm going to turn the heat down to medium. And I'm going to put the peppers in the same pan in just a minute. This is working 1 red bell pepper, 1 onion, and I have about 8 or 9 mushrooms that will go in a little bit later. I don't want the mushrooms to sit too long. They end up getting a little spongy if they overcook. So here go the peppers. I wish you could smell this. It is so awesome. All right, so there's our onions. Here's your peppers. This is one of those things that, I don't like peppers. Well, don't do peppers. That's fine. I don't like mushrooms. Don't do mushrooms. No problem. There is no one thing that is a must-have or a must-not-have. I'm going to be making some tofu instead of steak for my son, who requested it, because that's what he likes. So I'm happy with how things are looking here. I have the peppers starting. I don't need them to brown nearly as much as I did the onions. So now this is all going to sit on the back burner at a low temp for maybe 15-20 minutes. Cast iron pan gets super hot, so make sure you have a towel or a pot holder. Bring that back there. So we have our soup here. I'm going to show it to you one more time before we sign off. That's where we are right now. And I just steamed up my camera. All right, let's see if I can... All right, so that's going to sit for about 15-20 minutes. This has another 20 minutes or so before we puree it. And we'll do our steak and our mushrooms right at the end. And so we'll see you back in 20 minutes. Bye.